Hello everyone and welcome back to Mastering Medicine video lectures. In previous lecture I talked about skeletal muscle structure and its functions, and also I talked about the basic mechanism of contraction of skeletal muscle. Today we're going to discuss smooth muscle structure and its mechanism of contraction. And keep it in your mind that smooth muscle is structurally and functionally different from the skeletal muscle. And also, mechanism of contraction of smooth muscle is a bit complex than the skeletal muscle, because skeletal muscle is stimulated only by neurons, or it has only neuron stimulation, but smooth muscle is stimulated by different ways, by different factors. It's stimulated by neurotransmitter, is stimulated by local factors like histamine, like nitric oxide, and so on. It's stimulated by hormones, by ligands, and so on. So that's why it has a little bit complex mechanism of stimulation or contraction. Okay. And also, during this lecture, first we will talk about the basic histology of smooth muscle. Then we're going to talk about differences between skeletal muscle and smooth muscle structurally and functionally. Then we will talk about different types of smooth muscle. For example, we'll talk about multi-unit smooth muscle versus unitary smooth muscle. And also we will talk about its arrangement in our body, and we will talk about different mechanisms of action potential in different types of action potential in smooth muscle. For example, we'll talk about spike potential, we'll talk about slow waves, and so on. And also we will talk about latch state mechanism, neuromuscular junction, and also those factors that are excitatory and inhibitory for smooth muscles. Okay, so now let's dive in. First is first. Smooth muscles are called involuntary muscles also because they're stimulated by autonomic nervous system. And previous lecture we discussed that contraction of skeletal muscle is under our control. Okay, for example, when I want to contract this muscle, so it depends to me. Okay, but contraction of a smooth muscle is occurred automatically under influence of different factors. For example, contraction of heart or heartbeats are not related to me. It's not under my control. Okay, it's under the control of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So that's why, because smooth muscles are innervated by sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, that's why they're called involuntary muscles. Okay, and also smooth muscles are non-striated. They look smooth under the microscope. Okay, because in skeletal muscle we have thick filaments and thin filaments. Okay, there are thin filaments and there are thick filaments, and also we have z lines or z discs. Okay, and between the space between z disc is called sarcomere. Okay, so because of this regular arrangement of thick filaments and thin filaments, they look under the microscope striated. Okay, the produces different patterns. Okay, under the microscope. So that's why skeletal muscle is called striated muscle. But in smooth muscles we don't have z lines, we don't have sarcomeres, we don't have this type arrangement of thick filament and thin filaments. So that's why the don't look striated, and they're called smooth muscles that we'll talk about it later on. Okay, and also that's structurally. Okay, the shape of a cell of smooth muscle is spindle-like or fusiform, that its center part is wider than their two edges, okay, and it's tapered in its two ends, okay. For example, it's tapered here, it's also tapered here, so that's why this is called spindle-like or fusiform cell, okay. And also smooth muscle has high plasticity or high elasticity, okay. It means when we stretch them, so they are so stretchable, they will stretch easily and they will come back to their original structure once again so easily compared to skeletal muscles. So that's why they're called that, they're more, they have more elastic structure, okay. Plus, another important characteristic of smooth muscle is that they use less energy and produce more tension, that we will talk about it later on under the title of latch state mechanism, okay. So these were, and also smooth muscle is stimulated by different factors. It's stimulated by autonomic nervous system, it's stimulated by local factors, it's stimulated by hormones, it's stimulated by stretch, okay, that we will talk about each of them one by one later on, okay. Now, these were some important characteristics of smooth muscles. Now, let me explain the basic structure of a smooth muscle. Then we will talk about basic mechanism of contraction of smooth muscle, and then I'll talk about two important types of smooth muscle, which are multi-unit smooth muscles and unitary smooth muscle. And also we'll talk about a very causities. Okay, don't worry. First of all, this is a cell of smooth muscle. It has a fusiform shape, it's spindle-like, it's tapered, and its two ends. Plus, a smooth muscle cell is covered by a thin layer of connective tissue, which is made of type 1 and type 3 collagen, okay. And also it has a cell membrane. We know that all cells contain cell membrane. Now, nucleus in smooth muscle is located in center of the cell, okay. And it has only one nucleus, but in skeletal muscle we had a lot of nucleuses, okay. And also their nucleuses were located uh, periphery, not in the center, okay. Now, organelles are in smooth muscle. For example, this is mitochondria, this is mitochondria, okay. This is located, this endoplasmic reticulum, this, for example, some other organelles, all of them are located centrally in smooth muscle. Now, in smooth muscle, endoplasmic reticulum or sarcoplasmic reticulum is not fully developed. This is so important, okay. But for example, in skeletal muscle, we had a T tubule, okay, and in either side of T-tubule, we had sarcoplasmic reticulum that as a collectively they are going to make a triad structure, okay. But here we don't have triad structure, here we don't have T-tubule, so, and we have only some parts, some small parts of endoplasmic reticulum, and we have a lot of calcium inside the endoplasmic reticulum. Now, in the cell membrane of smooth muscle, we have some invagination, some deep areas, okay? And these small depths or the small invaginations in cell membrane are called caveoli. They are called caveoli. They are called caveoli, okay? But in skeletal muscle, we had T-tubule, okay? Now, Here in smooth muscle, we don't have Z discs, okay? And instead of Z discs, we have proteinous structure, okay, that they are called dense bodies. They are called dense bodies. They are called, for example, they're dense bodies, okay? And these two dense bodies are interconnected to each other by a protein which is called intermediate filament. And this intermediate filament is made of desmin and vimentin proteins. Okay, and also these dense bodies are connected to other dense bodies like structure that they're submembranous or they're near to the membrane, and they are called dense plaques. They are called, for example, these are called dense plaque. Okay, now dense plaque has two important functions. One, it's interconnected to the dense body, and two dense plaques of two smooth muscle cells are coming, and they're going to make a strong junction between two cells. So it's second function of dense plaque. And dense plaque is made of vinculin and integrin proteins. Okay, now about contractile unit of smooth muscle. Here in skeletal muscle, we had thick filament, okay, that thick filament is connected to Z disc by some proteins, and we have thin filaments, okay. But here between two dense bodies, we have thin filaments plus thick filaments. So here thin filament and thick filaments are between two dense bodies, but here thick filament and thin filaments are between two Z lines. Okay, now about its mechanism of contraction we will talk later on. Okay, don't worry. Okay, now here is another very important structural difference between smooth muscle and a skeletal muscle, and this is about the arrangement of thin filament and thick filament. First, here thin and thick filaments are arranged in oblique fashion, okay, in oblique shape. Other here for example, this is skeletal muscle, this is Z disc. Be careful here, this is very important. Okay, this is Z disc, this is thin filament, this one is also thin filament, and this is thick filament between two thin filaments. Now here these are heads of myosins. Okay, here all head of myosins try to bring these thin filaments to one direction, to middle point or to middle direction, and the movement of thin filament or sliding of thin filaments on thick filaments cause these sarcomeres to be closed, to be small, and causes contraction and causes production of force that we have studied in previous lecture. But here, these head of myosins are arranged in one side of a thick filament. That's why they are called side polar. It means here this side of thick filament or this side of head of myosins try to bring these thin filaments or this thin filament to this direction, and the other side of this thick filament or head of myosins try to bring thin filament to the opposite direction of this other one, and it causes shrinking of a smooth muscle and production of so strong force compared to the skeletal muscle. For example, this is a thin filament. Okay, now here these are head of myosins, and here also these are head of myosins. Now these head of myosins try to bring this thin filament to this direction, and these head of myosins try to bring thin filament to this direction, and as a collectively these two dense bodies will come to each other so near and causes shrinking of smooth muscle. So this is very important thing, and this is very important arrangement in smooth muscle. Otherwise, the cross bridge cycle between smooth muscle and skeletal muscle are the same. Okay, so these were all about structure of smooth muscle. Now we're gonna talk about, okay, mechanism of contraction of smooth muscle, and then we'll talk about two important types of smooth muscle, which are multi-unit and unitary smooth muscle.